Marria spent 23 years designing structures meant to withstand time. Bridges, hospitals, courthouses. Buildings where the integrity of every joint, every load-bearing wall, every unseen support beam is the difference between something that stands and something that collapses without warning. People always ask me what the hardest part of the job is. And I tell them the same thing every time: it's never the visible work. It's what's happening inside the walls that you can't see. Rot doesn't announce itself. By the time you notice the surface beginning to give, the damage has already gone deep. I never thought I'd spend the back half of my 40s applying that lesson to my own life. My name isn't important. What matters is that I was, for 22 years, a husband. I was a father. I was a man who believed, with the kind of quiet certainty that requires no reassurance, that the life I had built was solid. Not perfect. Nothing is perfect. And any architect worth his license will tell you that perfection in design is the enemy of function, but solid, honest, real. My wife and I met when I was 26. She was 24, working at an interior design firm downtown, and she walked into a client meeting I was leading with this energy that made the whole room recalibrate. We dated for 2 years. We married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in September. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. We had a daughter who, by the time this story takes place, was finishing her sophomore year at Ohio State. 22 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. The signs, if I'm being honest now with the clarity of distance, had been there for about 8 or 9 months before that night. She had become unreachable in a way that wasn't geographic. She was physically present at dinner, at weekend errands, at the occasional neighborhood gathering we'd been going to for a decade. But there was a pane of glass between us that I kept telling myself was temporary. Work stress, I thought. Hormonal changes, maybe. The particular melancholy of a woman watching her daughter leave childhood behind. I gave it names because unnamed things are harder to live with. I stopped traveling for work about 5 years ago when I made partner. But that spring, one of our biggest contracts, a federal courthouse in Pittsburgh, required me on site 3 days a week for nearly 2 months. I drove up Sunday nights, stayed in an extended stay hotel, drove back Wednesday evenings. It became a rhythm. My wife seemed, if anything, more comfortable in those stretches. I told myself that was normal too. The Wednesday I came home and found them. I wasn't supposed to be there until after 7. The site inspection wrapped 4 hours early because of a materials delay, and rather than sit in a hotel room watching cable news, I got in my car and drove home. I remember thinking how much I was looking forward to just being in my own kitchen, to sleeping in my own bed. I noticed the unfamiliar car in the driveway, a dark blue BMW, clean, newer model, and my first thought was that she had a friend visiting. I almost texted her to warn her I was home early, the kind of considerate habit you build after 2 decades with someone. I didn't. I just unlocked the front door. The house was quiet in the particular way houses are when people inside them believe themselves to be alone. I set my bag down in the entryway. I loosened my tie. I walked up the stairs. I don't need to describe what I saw when I opened the bedroom door. You know what I saw. What I will describe is the 10 seconds that followed, because those 10 seconds told me everything I needed to know about who my wife had become, or perhaps who she had always been underneath the version I'd been allowed to see. She sat up. She looked at me, and the expression on her face was not horror. It was not shame. It was not the desperate, crumbling guilt of someone caught in the worst moment of their life. It was annoyance, a flicker of annoyance, and then something harder, something almost rehearsed, like she had played the scene in her head and had decided in advance how I was going to go. "Close the door," she said. I didn't move. The man in my bed. I would later learn his name was Marcus, that he was 38, that he worked as a financial advisor at a firm downtown, reached for his shirt with the measured calm of someone who had assessed the situation and determined there was no real threat to him. "We need to talk," my wife said. "About what?" I heard myself ask, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "About us. About this." She gestured vaguely, as if the scene I had just walked in on were a conversation piece rather than a detonation. "I've been unhappy for a long time, and I need you to understand that this isn't something that just happened. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I believe that our marriage can evolve. There are couples who—" "Stop," I said. She stopped. Marcus finished buttoning his shirt. Neither of them appeared particularly troubled by my presence in the doorway of my own bedroom. I need you to really hear me out before you react, she said. What I'm proposing isn't that unusual anymore. A lot of couples, I heard you, I said. I don't need to hear more. You're going to react emotionally right now, and that's understandable. But I'm not reacting emotionally. And I wasn't. That was the strange thing. I wasn't cold exactly. I was just precise. The way I get when I'm looking at a structural problem, identifying what's there, deciding what needs to happen. I'm listening to you very clearly. Then listen to this. And here is where it shifted. Here is where the conversation stopped being a conversation. She sat up straighter, and something in her expression locked into place. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you how things are going to be. If you want to stay in this marriage, this is what the marriage looks like now. If you can't accept that, then maybe you need to think seriously about whether you want to be here at all. 22 years. I looked at the man in my bed. I looked at my wife. I nodded slowly, the way I nod when a client has just told me something that fundamentally changes the scope of a project. Okay, I said. I went to the guest room closet, where I kept a spare duffel bag from an old gym habit. I packed 3 days of clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, my chargers, my passport, and the emergency folder I keep in the fireproof box in my home office. Insurance documents, financial account numbers, the things a person needs to be mobile. I worked methodically, without hurry. I did not slam drawers. I did not throw anything. My wife appeared in the doorway of the guest room before I was done. Where are you going? Out. We're not finished talking. I am. You're being dramatic. I need you to calm down. And I zipped the duffel and picked it up and walked past her without looking at her face. And I went down the stairs and out the front door, and I got in my car and I drove away, and I did not look back at the house. I want to be specific about where I went, because clarity matters here. I drove 40 minutes north to the home of my older brother, who lives outside Delaware, Ohio, on a few acres of land with his wife of 30 years. I had not called ahead. When he answered the door and saw my face and the duffel bag in my hand, he said nothing except, "Come in." And that was the right thing to say. I told him everything that night. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill I have always admired in him. When I was done, he said, "You know you can stay as long as you need to." I told him no one was to know my location. Not my colleagues, not mutual friends, no one. He understood. His wife made up the guest room and brought me coffee without being asked. And I was, in that moment, overwhelmingly grateful for people who simply do the right thing without needing applause for it. I called my daughter from my brother's porch that night. She was studying for finals, and I hated calling her. But I needed to hear her voice, and I needed her to hear mine, so she would know I was standing upright. I told her only that her mother and I were going through something serious, that I was safe and staying with her uncle, and that I needed her to not worry about me and focus on her exams. She cried, which I had expected. She asked me what happened. I told her that was a conversation for when she was done with finals, face-to-face, and not a phone call at 11 on a Wednesday night. She asked if I was coming home. I told her I was already home. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, Dad, I love you too, sweetheart. I love you too, sweetheart." That was the whole conversation. 22 years of marriage ended in the space of a duffel bag and a 15-minute phone call to my kid. My wife called my cell phone 9 times over the next 2 days. I let them go to voicemail. On the 3rd day, she sent a text that said she had been trying to reach me and that we needed to handle this like adults. I read it and set my phone down and went out to help my brother split firewood, which is the kind of mindless physical work that a person needs sometimes when their mind will not quiet down. I had already called a divorce attorney the morning after I arrived at my brother's place. I want to say that clearly because I have heard the criticism that men in situations like this spend weeks trying to decide what to do, paralyzed by hope or habit or fear. I was done deciding the moment she looked at me in that doorway with annoyance on her face. You do not annoy your husband of 22 years when he catches you. That's when I knew there was nothing to save. Whatever had been real between us had ended before that night, ended long enough ago that she had learned to feel inconvenienced rather than ashamed. The call from my daughter came on the 5th day. I was on the porch with my second cup of coffee, reviewing a set of drawings my associate had sent over, when my phone rang and I saw her name. "Hey, sweetheart." Her voice was different, tight in a particular way that I recognized from when she was young and frightened, but trying to sound older than she was. "Dad, something happened." I set the drawings down. What she told me was this. Early that morning, she had gotten a call from her mother, who was calling from a police station, not because she was in trouble, or not in the way I would have expected. Detectives had shown up at the house the evening before looking for Marcus. It turned out that Marcus, the composed and well-dressed financial advisor who had been in my bed 5 days ago, was the subject of a federal investigation. Over the course of approximately 3 years, he had used his position to defraud several of his clients, most of them women who had trusted him personally, as well as professionally. We are talking about retirement accounts, trust funds, elderly women's life savings. The total amount ran to something in the neighborhood of $2 million. Some of the victims were people my wife had apparently met through him. There was also, it emerged during the investigation, a pattern of behavior that suggested he targeted emotionally vulnerable women. Specifically, women going through marital difficulties, midlife transitions, loneliness, not just for their money, but as a kind of systematic manipulation. My wife, it turned out, was not the predator in her own story. She had been hunted. She had been identified, cultivated, and used by a man who did this professionally, which did not, and I want to say this with precision, excuse what she had done to me, or what she had said to me in that bedroom. She had made choices. She had looked me in the eye and delivered an ultimatum. She had chosen to let a stranger into my home and into my bed and then act as though my objection was the problem. Those choices were hers. But the context was more complicated than I had known. My daughter told me her mother was cooperating with federal investigators. She told me her mother had been on the phone with her twice that morning, alternately crying and asking my daughter if she thought I would come home. I listened to all of this without interrupting. When my daughter was done, she asked, "What are you going to do, Dad?" "I'm going to continue with the divorce," I said. "She's really..." My daughter paused. "She sounds really bad." "I know." "Are you going to call her?" "No." Another pause. "Do you think I should go see her?" "That's her decision to make, not mine. She's your mother regardless of what she did to me. But I need you to know that whatever you decide about your relationship with her doesn't change anything between you and me. You understand that?" She said she understood. She sounded relieved to have permission to feel more than one thing at once, which is something children, even grown ones, sometimes need from their parents. I did not go to see my wife. I did not call her. I did not respond when she sent a message through a mutual friend saying she needed to speak with me. My attorney communicated everything that needed to be communicated. There is a thing that happens to men who have been betrayed, a pull towards some gesture of reclamation, to go see the damage up close, to hear her explanation, to watch her cry and feel something shift back toward what it was. I recognized that pull, and I did not follow it, not out of cruelty, out of an honest reckoning with what I knew, that there was no version of any conversation we could have that would give me back the 22 years, the bedroom I would now have to repaint, the version of myself who had woken up that last Tuesday morning still believing his marriage was solid. Those things were gone. Sitting across from her in some mediator's office or hospital room or kitchen table was not going to restore them. It was only going to prolong both of our suffering while pretending there was a door that could be reopened. The door was not reopened. Marcus was arrested and charged on multiple counts of wire fraud, financial elder abuse, and securities violations. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement. He received a sentence of 11 years in federal prison. Whatever my wife had believed about him, whatever he had told her about himself and his intentions, it ended in a federal courtroom with a man in a suit reading charges aloud in a flat voice, while a court reporter transcribed them for the permanent record. My wife struggled. I heard about this through my daughter, in the carefully edited way that a grown child relays information between two parents who are no longer speaking. She was in therapy. She was dealing with the reality of having been deceived by someone she thought she knew. She was dealing with the legal process of being a cooperating witness. She was dealing, most fundamentally, with what she had done and said to me on that Wednesday night, which, as far as I could tell from my daughter's careful reports, was the part she found hardest to sit with. Good. Not because I wished her suffering. I didn't. But because that recognition mattered. Because a person who walked away from 22 years of marriage without understanding why should not be allowed to walk away comfortable. The divorce was finalized 11 months after I drove away from that house with a duffel bag. Our attorneys handled almost everything. We divided assets equitably and without significant dispute, which is the one grace note in an otherwise graceless situation. I kept my retirement accounts. She kept hers. We sold the house, split the proceeds. I moved into a rental apartment closer to the office while I figured out what came next. What came next was, gradually, something I had not expected. A quieter life that was, in its quietness, more genuinely mine than the life I'd had before. I started working later at the office, which sounds like a small thing but wasn't. For years I had calibrated my schedule around being home for dinner, a habit so ingrained I had stopped examining why I still maintained it long after my daughter left for college. Now I worked until I was done working, then went to my apartment and cooked for myself, or didn't. And the absence of the need to perform a domestic routine was strange, and then, slowly, not strange at all. My daughter finished her degree. She called me every Sunday. She had decided to maintain a relationship with her mother. A relationship I knew was complicated and that I was careful never to make more complicated by asking about it. She had been given an impossible amount to carry by two adults who were supposed to make her life simpler, and the least I could do was refuse to add to the weight. I want to say something about loyalty, because it has sat at the center of my thinking since that night in a way that nothing else has. I was a loyal husband. I was not a perfect husband. I worked long hours. I was sometimes distracted. I could be distant when a project consumed me. But I was faithful, and I was present, and I honored what I had agreed to honor when I stood in her parents' backyard at 28 years old and said the words out loud. I never stopped being that man. And I used to think that loving someone was the thing that held a marriage together. I don't think that anymore. Love, I've come to understand, is what you feel. Loyalty is what you do. My wife still loved me, in some version of the word, when she was in that bedroom with Marcus. She said as much eventually, through our attorneys, in a letter I read once and did not respond to. She never stopped loving me, the letter said. I have thought about those words many times in the years since. Loving someone means nothing if you do not choose them. Every single day, in the ordinary and unremarkable choices that no one watches and no one applauds, you choose the person you married. You choose them when it's easy, and you choose them when it's hard, and you choose them when something more exciting appears at the edges of your vision, and the choosing becomes costly. That is what a marriage is. Not a feeling. A daily decision. She stopped making that decision long before I opened that bedroom door. And when I stood there and she looked at me with annoyance instead of shame, what I was really seeing was the accumulated weight of all the days she had chosen not to choose me. That's what was in the room. Not just Marcus. Not just betrayal. 22 years of a man who had shown up every single day, standing in a doorway being told he was the inconvenient one. I stopped being angry about it somewhere around the 18-month mark. Not because I forgave it. I'm not certain forgiveness is the right frame for what happened, or that it's something I owe anyone in this situation, but because the anger required me to keep returning to that room in my mind, and I was finished standing in that doorway. I had other rooms to stand in. I had drawings on my desk, and a daughter who called on Sundays, and a brother who split firewood with me in silence when I needed it, and an apartment I was slowly making into something that felt like mine. I turned 52 last March. My daughter came up for the weekend. We went to a restaurant she'd been reading about for months, and she gave me a card she'd made herself, hand-lettered in that careful way she has, that said something I've kept on my desk since. It said, "The strongest structures aren't the ones that never face pressure. They're the ones that were built to be honest." She didn't mean architecture. She's not an architect, but she grew up watching me work, and somewhere along the way she absorbed the vocabulary and she knew exactly what she was saying. I am, at 52, more certain of who I am than I was at 30. I am an architect who builds things meant to stand. I am a father whose daughter calls on Sundays. I am a man who, when everything he thought he had turned out to be less than he'd believed, picked up a duffel bag and walked out a door and did not beg for a different outcome. The foundation of what I had was dishonest. I did not know that, and that is a grief I have had to sit with. The grief of having given real things to something that was partly fiction. But the man I was while I gave them was real. The effort was real. The 22 years of showing up were real. I am still that man, and I have learned, in the particular way that loss teaches you what it chooses, that the most dangerous structural failures are never the ones you can see. They are the ones developing quietly, invisibly, in the spaces you trusted enough to stop inspecting. I inspect more carefully now, not with suspicion. I have not become a suspicious man, but with attention, with the understanding that the things worth building deserve to be looked at honestly and often, and that no structure, however beautiful from the outside, can survive what is eating it from within. I am building something new. I don't know yet what it will look like when it's finished. But the foundation is honest. That's where I always start.